This is a story about love, loss, and the long road back to light. My son Ryder was born still after what seemed to be a healthy, full-term, uneventful pregnancy. Nothing prepared us for that day or for everything that followed. In this podcast, I'll take you through the moments leading up to his passing, the immediate aftermath, and the reality of learning how to survive something that feels impossible to survive. I'll show you how I slowly found my footing again, how joy eventually made its way back into my life, and where I am today. This is not medical advice, and I'm not a therapist or healthcare professional. These are my experiences, my perspectives, and my truth. If you are walking a similar path, I encourage you to seek guidance from your care providers and find what works best for you. But this is my story, and if you're here, I hope that somewhere within it, you find a little bit of hope. March 22nd, 2019, the day that Ryder was born, was a normal day. We were already at past full term actually. It was a week past our due date, and it was the day of our scheduled induction. The car was packed, the bags were packed, everything was ready to go. It was a normal day, like I said. We went to work, I think. Maybe we took the day off one last day. I can't really remember, but I do know early in the afternoon, my wife and I were just getting ready. We were enjoying the weather. It was a beautiful spring day in the Southeast. We went out to have an early dinner / late lunch. And then we went home and began to watch some mindless TV on Netflix, I believe. We were sitting on the couch, ready to go. We were anxious, but everything felt good. Nothing to set off any alarms or red flags, anything like that. We wanted to leave early, get to the hospital with plenty of time. This was our first child. We wanted to do everything right. My wife, Anne, felt the urge to need to use the restroom, so she got up as we were turning off the TV and getting ready to walk out the door. And she called me from the bathroom, very calm, yet urgent. You could tell, you could hear the fear in her voice. And she said that something was wrong and that I needed to call 911. She didn't want to alarm me, but she did say that there was blood. She felt like it was abnormal. And this is where things really start to go south rather quickly. Again, uneventful pregnancy up until this point, and this is the first sign of any real trouble ahead. So I did what she asked. I called 911, and the 911 operator was very helpful. She started walking me through the things I would need to do to deliver this baby at home. She thought normal pregnancy, no issues. She asked a lot of questions, and so she was preparing me to deliver the baby at home. We said there was a lot of blood. She said that's normal. She was not knowing the situation. She wasn't there with us in the room, so she was going through the playbook, and she was doing a great job in all aspects of that. She let us know that the ambulance was on its way and that it would take several minutes. It took about 8 minutes, or exactly 8 minutes from my recollection, phone records, things like that, for them to arrive. We could hear the sirens coming in the distance. We felt good that we were going to get some help, but we did feel like there was too much blood. And that was really the first indicator that something was wrong. The ambulance crew got there. They parked in the street. They walked up to the front door, and they started to assess the situation. The sense of urgency was not what we would have liked it to be, if I'm being honest. There was a lot of walking, a lot of talking about things that were not my wife, not the baby. My wife said they were talking about upcoming retirements and things that were going on in the past weekend and in the upcoming weekend. And they were asking my wife how she was, if she was in pain. They checked her vital signs and everything seemed fine. But again, not addressing the baby. They were not trained to monitor the baby, check the baby's vitals, anything like that. So it was just going off of my wife and how she felt. And at that point, she was not in pain, and they were just acting as if everything was normal. Anna and I thought right away that something was wrong. Call it mother's intuition, father's intuitions, whatever it is, but we knew something wasn't right. And I don't know why I did this, but as I said, there was blood and did hemorrhage in some way, shape, or form while she was in the bathroom. And so there was blood, not to be gross or to paint a scene, but there was blood in the toilet, on the floor. And for whatever reason, I thought in that moment that in case this goes really poorly, I should clean this up. I should try to not have any traumatic reminders of the event. And I don't know why my mind went there, but it did. And so very quickly, I did a very quick clean. And then I called our friends, Mary and Jay, talked to Jay. They were expecting a baby announcement. They were expecting us to say, the baby's here and come visit us in the hospital and everything's great. That was not the conversation. I told Jay what was happening and just quite frankly asked him to meet me at the hospital, that I felt something was very wrong and that if this were to go south quickly, I didn't know how I could handle this on my own. Our families were not close. They lived in the Midwest. Parents, brothers, sisters, all of those close family members were several hours and hundreds of miles away. So we called two of our closest friends in the area to meet us at the hospital. I then got in the car and started calling my wife's sister, Laura. Every member or every family has that member that you turn to when the shit hits the fan to bring everything together, to make things happen. And Laura is that person, especially around medical issues in the family. She is a medically trained nurse. She works in the field, not OBGYN, but she does have a medical background. So called Laura. She did not have my number. So she ignored my calls. She was bowling, but quickly was able to get a hold of her. She was like, who's this person that keeps blowing up my phone? So she did answer, or she did call me back after a few short minutes, realized that it was me and quickly knew something was wrong. And Laura was amazing. She calmed me down. This is normal. Get to the hospital and keep us updated. But I think she also knew that something was wrong because she immediately left where she was at. She went to her parents' house 25 minutes away and started to gather my wife's very large family and set the stage for what was going on. And she was the point person. And I'm in the car and I am actually past the ambulance. The ambulance did not go emergent, so there was no lights or sirens. Again, there was no urgency. They were taking their time. And this was in a city in the Southeast, huge tourist trap, especially on the weekends. This was I believe a Friday evening. And so traffic, an issue. Lights and sirens, please. Also major construction projects happening within the city to expand the roadways because of the congestion and the tourist trap. So again, like lights and sirens, but they didn't. And so I actually beat the ambulance to the hospital and came in, had to go through security, and it was odd, but you do what you have to do. I got into the emergency room and actually saw them bringing Anne in, and they tell you in birthing class and all the things, like when things happen, don't go to the emergency room, go to the maternity ward. Why the emergency response team did not know this is unclear to me. Those are things that we'll never get answers to, but they took my wife to the wrong area. And so as they're checking her in, they tell the EMT group that they need to take her up to the maternity ward. And that's what they do. And it's several floors away. It's a maze in the hospital hallways. There's medical equipment, things all over the place. And it is a cluttered mess of things to get through to get to the maternity ward. But they get up there and they actually beat me up there. So when I get up there, they are checking my wife into a triage room. And during this process, somebody walks in and my wife and I are thinking, finally, somebody's going to listen to the baby, check the baby, because at this point, there still has not been any sort of checkup on our child. And we're hopeful that it's finally going to happen. And then somebody walks in and says, no, this is our scheduled induction. She's supposed to be here today. And they moved her into a labor and delivery room, which was great. There are more tools. It's where she needed to be. but we're wasting time. We're going from floor to floor to room. And so it's just, the time is ticking and it's not on our side. And we've still not checked the baby yet. And so as these precious minutes tick away, she's then checked into her labor and delivery room, where an entire team of doctors is looking at her, working on her, and they finally start to check the baby's vitals, and they're not finding anything. And after a minute or so, probably not even, it felt like an eternity, but seconds, they call somebody else in, and she finds the heartbeat. It's faint, it's there, but they have to move quickly. And so they move immediately to an emergency C-section. They prep my wife very quickly. They sit me down in the corner. They wheel her out, and then I sit there. They said it'd be about 20 minutes. I can't tell you how long it was, but it was longer than that, probably about an hour or so. And I sat in that room, and that is the most lonely place, I think, on the face of the earth, when you're sitting in a hospital room by yourself and someone you love, your wife, your unborn child, just anyone that you care for. If you're in that position, I think that's got to be the loneliest place on the planet. You're just sitting there with your thoughts in the unknown. And the only sound that was in that room was the ticking of a clock. And to this day, it's the most sickening sound I think I can hear. I can't stand it. I'm like Captain Hook in Peter Pan. Like, you hear the clock and you lose your mind. It's a nauseating sound for me since that day. But I sat there for about an hour with just the ticking of the clock, which became like the slow drip of a faucet and then the hammering of a sledgehammer. It got so loud and so unsettling. But somebody finally walked in. And I remember this doctor, not because of his skill, the bedside manner, definitely not. But I can picture him only because he looked like somebody I had worked with, somebody that I used to manage. So Ed, if you're listening to this, I love you, but you're part of this story in the worst way. This doctor came in who would have been Ryder's doctor during the emergency C-section. He introduced himself and then said, "Mr. Mendelke, your son was born dead." Those are the words he used. And so they stand out for several reasons. It's the most jarring news I've ever heard in my life. But my wife and I were also planning for this baby, but we wanted it to be a surprise. We did not know the sex of the baby. And so this is how I found out that we were having a boy. And then in that same breath, I found out that he did not survive. And the conversation was very direct, very blunt. The doctor did go on to tell me some of the things that were attempted to aid Ryder and to resuscitate Ryder, but they were unsuccessful. And then he also let me know that he would be back when my wife came back in to explain everything to her so that I wouldn't have to deliver the news. And so he then walked out, and I called Mary and Jay, and they were still waiting, and let them know what I had found out, that Ryder had passed. And we were all shocked. All of us were shocked. We were all expecting this baby. And immediately it was, what do we do? And we sat there for a minute, and I wanted to call our friend Steve. Our friend Steve is an attorney. I felt like something was wrong. It was over an hour between the 911 call and the first check on Ryder's vital signs. That felt wrong. That felt like a huge mistake. The ambulance crew did not have lights and sirens on. Like, that felt like a mistake. And the other part of this is they took us to the emergency room instead of the maternity ward. That felt like a mistake. There was clutter all in the hallways, not making it the most expedient, efficient path from the emergency room to the labor and delivery floor. That felt like a mistake. It felt like the deck was stacked against us from the time Anne got up to use the bathroom and she experienced the event that would ultimately lead to Ryder's passing. It felt like a lot of things were going wrong. And so we called Steve and started asking him questions. And of course he was flabbergasted because nobody expected this call, right? And so we talked through some things, and then I called my sister-in-law to let her know. And she was already on her way down from Iowa with my mother-in-law and father-in-law. So they were on their way. And then I started to call some of my family, my brothers. And I remember calling my brother Tim, and this was late at night now at this point. It's 11 o'clock at night or so, give or take. I told Tim what had happened and asked him to tell our mother. We didn't want to tell her over the phone, so we both decided he should drive to her house and tell her in person. Back then, Tim still lived on the south side of Chicago, which was probably about an hour and a half, 2 hours away from our mother's home in northern Illinois. Tim got in the car and drove to now break my mother's heart. We didn't want to tell my mom over the phone. The news would have been too difficult to process for her on her own, alone in the middle of the night. We had recently lost my father to cancer about a year or two before. This baby was the joy back in my mom's life. There was going to be this baby, and we just didn't feel right just calling her and telling her. So I sent my brother, but of course it was late at night and he woke her up and broke the news. And so my mom and her sister, my Aunt Susie, also got in the car to make the trek down to where we were. But that was the immediate aftermath of the situation. Eventually, Anne comes back into the room, and it was an emergency C-section. She was under anesthesia and still coming out of that fog. She was brought in, and as she started waking up, she started to ask a lot of questions. She asked if it was a boy, and I said yes. But it was very hard to answer those questions. I was really struggling to compose myself, just to not cry, to not break down. And so she continued to ask questions about the baby, if I'd seen him, was he okay? And I knew at that point I couldn't lie to her, so I had to tell her that he had passed. And so this is kind of the first mistake, or the first, I don't know if it's a mistake. I don't know what I would call it, but the first letdown in a series of letdowns, even after Ryder had passed. The doctor did not come back in. He did not hold true to his word. He was not there to tell my wife what had happened. It was on me to do that. And that was the first gut punch in a series of gut punches over the next few days. So I tell Anne, and of course, she's devastated, and lots of tears, lots of hugs. The conversations took all sorts of lefts and right turns, swerves. She was coming out of being knocked out for a major surgery. So the dots aren't all connecting. And so the conversation wasn't in a straight line. We had to go over things multiple times. I think it was a traumatic experience for both of us for different reasons. I think Anne feels guilt, and I don't want to speak for her, but I think she feels guilt because, again, her thought process was not in a straight line. Those dots weren't all connecting. Some of her thoughts, or some of the things that she was saying, were not what she would have normally responded with, but she was coming out of kind of brain fog. And so we had to go over those things a couple of times. And even still to this day, have been conversations like, what exactly happened? What did I say? What did you say? So I think some things are unclear there. Anyway, if you've experienced this, if you've been through something similar, I don't think there's right or wrong responses. I don't think there's right or wrong answers to these questions that are happening in this moment. I'm just sharing these things because this is the real experience. This is what happened. And so, it's late. It is early morning, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and care team comes in, and they're talking to us about our son and what happened and what they tried to do. The doctors do finally show up, and they're talking us through everything. But they did let us know that he would have tubes and things because they did try to resuscitate. They intubated. They did other things. And so they had to legally, they had to leave these things in. And so when they were going to bring out our son, this equipment would still be attached. That was jarring to us, but it's what we were told to expect and to anticipate. A little later, they finally bring Ryder into the room to us, and this is where we see him. We meet him for the first time, and he was beautiful, perfect baby in every way, full head of hair, chubby cheeks, just so adorable. And I remember the nurses and the doctors telling us how perfect he was and how beautiful he was. And like the word perfect. Perfect. It was just getting thrown around. And in my mind, and this is, I'm going to be brutally honest here. They're like, he's perfect. And in my mind, I was like, he's not perfect. He's fucking dead. That's like the exact opposite of fucking perfect. I was so mad. Like that word just, it made me so angry in that moment. He's not perfect. This is not at all perfect. I didn't say it out loud, but in my mind, these was like screaming in my head. And so they left and we're holding Ryder. We're crying. My wife and I are talking, and we didn't know what the sex of the baby was going to be. And we didn't have a name because we weren't sure of the sex. And so these are the conversations that we're having. And we chose Ryder very quickly. And it's odd because it wasn't on our list, but it felt, and we knew as soon as we said it, that was his name. But we did have a conversation about the names on our list. And this was not a throwaway baby. We did not want a throwaway name. The name had to mean something. It had to be his name and his name alone. It had to be powerful and all these things. And we had the conversation. We did name him Ryder quickly. And then a conversation turned to, wait, why aren't these things here? These tubes are not here and all of that. It wasn't a long conversation, but I do remember it stood out. They wanted us to that these things were going to be there, and then they weren't. And so like it felt odd to us. And so we had asked, and they said that the decision was made that they could be removed for whatever reason. And it may have had to do with an autopsy. Maybe we said we didn't want an autopsy. So then they were like, okay, well then we can remove them. I can't remember exactly how this went down. I just know that they told us something and then that's not what happened. And the hospital stay was just a series of these types of events. I do want to say our nursing staff was amazing. They were beautiful human beings. They were so compassionate, and they really did care for my wife and I in that situation as best they could. But there were some mistakes made. At one point, a social worker came in from the hospital. She was asking questions about the baby's doctor, and I'm assuming that this is the person that is supposed to be filling out the paperwork for Social Security numbers and birth certificates and all of those things. So she came into the room not knowing that Ryder had passed. And so she had asked questions about his physician and was like, hey, like I took her out of the room and was like, our son passed away. And she got really flustered and told us that this shouldn't have happened, and there should have been a butterfly on the outside of the door, and she should have never came in there, and that she doesn't know who made the mistake. But it was almost like she was blaming me for her being embarrassed and coming into the room and just having the situation that nobody wanted. I didn't need to know that there should have been a butterfly on the door, but because this happened, she didn't ask the follow-up questions, the things that she would have asked in this situation if she wasn't flustered, if she was prepared, which becomes really important over the next few days. And so we'll get to that. But she doesn't ask the questions. She doesn't fill out any paperwork, and she leaves flustered. Like she's going to yell at somebody. Don't know who, but it wasn't us. Over the course of the next couple of days, we spend as much time with Ryder as we can. Hindsight being 2020, I wish we probably could have spent or should have spent more time, just because you never get that back. We didn't do things like we didn't undress him and change his diaper. Just these are things that don't dawn on you in that moment. But we never saw him naked. We never, saw his little butt or anything like that. And so like those things are sad. Those things weigh on us. But we didn't do those things at this time. We did take a lot of pictures. The hospital did have a service where a professional photographer would come in, and we did choose to have those photos made. They are beautiful and they are terrible and they are all the things in between. I prefer the black and white photos because Ryder does look just perfect and beautiful in those photos. The color pictures, you can tell that he had passed. And so, I don't love those. But we have those. We have those photos. We have them forever. And those are the only pictures that we'll ever get. So they are cherished, and we are so glad that we made that choice. And if you are going through this, if you know anyone who ever goes through this in a similar fashion, take the photos. They're so important. The nursing staff also made us other mementos, casts of his feet, imprints of his hands, fingerprints, footprints, handprints, those things. We did take some of his hair. You know, you don't get a second opportunity at those things. So if they're offered, take them, ask for them. We collect these things from the hospital, and we're getting ready to leave. And that was just another gut-wrenching experience, packing our things up, getting ready to leave the hospital without our son, without a baby. It felt so wrong. And I remember going down to the parking garage. It was like, I need to take the car seat out, and I need to hide some of these things that are going to be triggering for my wife. We already know that we're leaving without a baby. So let's remove those reminders. And so I was out in the garage doing that, and somebody stopped me to congratulate us on the baby. And I was like, oh no, it's the exact opposite. And again, Southeast. So they wanted to pray with me, and I allowed for that to happen. It felt nice in the moment. It felt like, someone was there watching. It felt like some sort of a sign at that time. And so I did talk to my wife about that, and we cried in the room. But as we were preparing to leave and say goodbye to Ryder, there were some hard choices that had to be made. They asked if we wanted Ryder in the room when we left, which we didn't. This was going to be hard. And so I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here, but in our opinion, for us, it was already going to be so extremely difficult to leave. What we knew that we could never walk out of the room and leave him there if that's what we had to do. And so we made the choice for them to come take him a little bit prior to us leaving as we were getting packed up. And so we were able to kind of adjust and mentally and emotionally prepare to walk out. We also had asked them to take us an alternate route through the hospital so that we did not have to go through the maternity ward and past new moms and new babies. And they did agree to that. And so we left the hospital that day without our son and with more questions than answers. Over the course of this day, they did come in, and the head of obstetrics and maternal fetal health, whatever the title was for the hospital, came out, and she did speak to us. My sister-in-law, Laura, was there, so she did ask some questions from a medical standpoint to see if this was going to be treated as I believe the word was a sentinel event. They said yes, which essentially is when there's an outcome that shouldn't have been, and so that it would be looked into and determined. They did tell us that the cause of death was due to a velamentous cord insertion, which is a pregnancy complication where the umbilical cord attaches to the fetal membranes instead of directly to the placenta, leaving blood vessels unprotected and at risk.
This is what caused the rupture, which led to the blood that Anne saw as she went into the early stages of labor at home.
So really what happened during delivery was this cord insertion ruptured, and then Ryder essentially bled out because of this. It's not uncommon. It's about 1 out of every 100 pregnancies. So 1% of pregnancies have some sort of velamentous cord insertion. It is something that is looked for during anatomy scans, during the ultrasounds, as part of the standard of care for pregnancy. And for whatever reason, it was missed in ours. But they're not totally uncommon, but they'd never seen this outcome. So they never lost a baby in this fashion, is what we were told. So I jumped a little bit backwards there, but again, just things at the hospital, they weren't adding up. Felt like there were mistakes, inefficiencies, ineffectiveness across the board. Again, nursing staff was great. The service they provided for the pictures was great. We cherished those. But man, there was a lot of missteps, a lot of poor bedside manner, and the conversations we had with the care team were not direct, and they weren't answering the questions we were asking until that sentinel event question that Laura asked. That was yes or no, and they were kind of painted into a corner. But then they knew that somebody knew the language in the room, and so they clammed up even more. And so conversations with the care team kind of ceased after that moment. But there was nothing we were going to get from them at that point. So we left the hospital without Ryder, and I remember the ride home being so surreal. It just felt so wrong, leaving that hospital without a baby, without our son. It was, I can't describe it. I can't put it into words. I don't know the words. It just felt so out of place, almost like I was watching myself in a movie, just staring into the mirror, into that empty back seat, which had been empty forever prior to that day.
Those first days after Ryder died didn't feel real. Time stopped, but somehow everything kept moving around us. Doctors came in and out. The world continued, even though ours had just completely shattered. In those moments, we didn't know what came next. We didn't know how to grieve, how to survive it, or how two parents were supposed to walk out of a hospital without their son. What we did know was that Ryder existed, he mattered, and he changed us forever. This podcast is our way of remembering him and telling the story of what came after those first impossible hours. The grief, the anger, the confusion, but also the people who carried us, the ways we learned to breathe again, and how Ryder's life, no matter how short, continues to shape ours. Thank you for listening and for holding space for our story. In the next episode, we'll talk about what it felt like to leave the hospital and step back into a world that suddenly felt completely different.